What's the highest point on Earth? Wrong. Well, wrong if you said Mount Everest at least, because they are lying to you. Now I don't know if it's they or if it's they them, but you've definitely been duped. But due to the Earth's curves, the placement of Mount Everest puts it at a disadvantage in the tallest point race, leaving Ecuador holding the highest point on Earth. And while Mount Everest stands at a measly 3,965 miles from the center of the Earth, Mount Chimborazo reaches a whopping 3,967 miles from the center of the Earth. And I don't want to hear anything about 2 miles not being a big deal without a signed letter from your gym teacher with your 1 mile run time. I know what you're thinking. Nobody's even been to the center of the Earth. Plus, we all know from base to peak, Mount Everest is the tallest. Excuse me, sir, did you order the poo-poo platter all wrong? Because that's still not the truth. That award goes to Mauna Kea. If we're judging how high in the air it is, then yeah, Mount Everest wins. But we don't just say you're taller than Shaq because the man's sitting down. So then why do we say Mauna Kea is shorter? Just because his knees are underwater. Probably the they-thems. And Mauna Kea base to peak is a massive 33,448 feet tall. Plus, look at that girth. It's so big it seems more like a landmass than a mountain from our point of view. All because he starts underwater, they decide not to measure his full height. It sounds like Mount Everest itself came up with the whole starting at sea level thing. Because I don't remember my height changing by -5 feet just because I'm standing in the pool. Apparently, it's best suited for pilots. So this is they, everyone. I found him. The global conspiracy. Oh, and the Nipolations. Or Nepalis. And created by, well, who could have guessed it? The Brits. Give it up for the New World Order, everyone. These are the reasons we've all been lied to in our darkest hours. Truly disturbing. Random thoughts that feel the same. Your dog has a favorite smell, but without the ability to tell anybody what it is, they may only be able to smell it a few times in their lives. Especially since smells they most prefer are usually on our never want to smell again list, like mid-stage decomposing animal carcass and pile of rotting leaves. We say repulsive and musky, they say delicious and irresistible. On the other hand, before the invention of sound recording, the average human may only hear their favorite song 1, maybe 3 times in their entire life. As a $1,000 ticket to see your favorite artist doesn't sound too bad until you realize you gotta fork that over every time you want to hear them. Gelatin is made out of animal bones and is a key ingredient to gummy worms to give that gummy-like texture. So gummy worms actually have more bones than real worms. And much of a muchness, lemon fresh pine salt contains more real lemon than country time lemonade, one of America's favorite lemonades, and actually just favorite drinks in general. But please don't drink pine salt, okay? That's not what I'm getting at here. Time out. Commercial break. Only 7% of you guys are subscribed. Help me change that. 92.4 of you guys subscribe right now while you're watching the video. That way you never miss one of these. Why don't people with depression just get up and clean their room? As most probably know, depression affects dopamine, which affects these bodily functions. Number 2, go ahead and step forward for me. Dopamine helps the relaying of signals that control body movement. That's why Parkinson's main inhibitor is the death of dopamine containing cells. The more the dopamine transmitted process is interrupted, the less you control your own movements. So you see how that could be a problem. Nobel Peace Prize winning neuropharmacologist Arvid Carlson took time to remove large amounts of dopamine from rabbits' brains, effectively leaving them immobile. And I'll give you 2 seconds to guess what happened when dopamine was reintroduced. 1, 2, that's right, hallelujah, they can move once again. And that's why when someone with depression feels like it's impossible to get out of bed, it's because sometimes it quite literally is impossible. The same amount as impossible as it would be to move without any muscles, because on the same importance of having the ability to move is also having the ability to relay the signal to move. So what have we learned today? So basically the dopaminergic hypofunction induced by the affected brain's natural chemical imbalance impede the mesolimbic, mesocortical, and nigrostriatal pathways of the system. On the S tier of importance regarding your brain's ability to communicate pleasure, decision making, and movement. When someone with depression says they can't do something, it's because they can't do it. Correct. Top 3 most horrifying Russian experiments. Number 3, the 2-headed dog. Vladimir Demikhov had attempted this experiment 23 times, and on the 24th time, finally succeeded, when he amputated the lower portion of a smaller dog. In the meantime, cut open a German Shepherd on his neck and attached a smaller dog to it. After an almost 4-hour operation, it was complete. Both dogs were connected and alive. They could both hear, see, smell, swallow, and all. Though Shopko wasn't attached to the stomach, and the food it did consume just traveled through a tube and right onto the floor. They both sadly passed after only 4 days. Number 2, the human Z. Ilya Ivanov artificially inseminated multiple female chimpanzees with human sperm to create a human-ape hybrid. When it didn't work, he got 3 women and used chimpanzee sperm instead, but the chimp-human didn't work and the human-chimp never actually happened. And number 1, Sergei Brukonenko has killed, severed the heads of, and brought back to life over a dozen dogs. While the dogs couldn't eat, breathe, or turn their heads without the rest of its muscles, they were attached to a heart machine. Many dogs were able to stay alive for months, reacting to touch, taste, light, and sounds. Though, they claim this dog was perfectly normal, in my opinion, this looks far from a normal condition. Things a glorious Betty White is older than. With both parents being born in the 1800s and older than the classic American hamburger, she's got to be older than a few things herself. And for starters, the states of Alaska and Hawaii. Betty White's America looks like this. Well, like this, seeing as she's older than the United States Air Force. Also, the freezer, and in conjunction, all frozen foods. And while we're on the topic of foods, she's older than Sloppy Joe's, Mountain Dew, Doritos, Kraft Mac and Cheese, Frosted Flakes, Ranch, and Chef Boyardee ravioli. And for the fast food restaurants, McDonald's, Burger King, Dunkin' Donuts, Domino's, Dairy Queen, KFC, and actually, every single one of the top 30 fast food chains in the United States. Probably even more, but I can't spend all day looking up these dates. She's older than these companies, and to top it off, she's older than the Walt Disney Company, which isn't really fair seeing as she's older than all of television as well. And your dog's not safe either. She's older than the mini Australian Shepherds, American Bullies, the Labradoodle, and even Bunny the dog's breed. Not to mention all this other stuff too. Dang, she's really older than the Queen. She stands at the 10th oldest celebrity in the world, and all we can do is hope that she makes it to number 1 one day. Top 3 common deaths. We really just used to die from anything. Like number 3, the great George Washington dying from a sore throat. On December 12, 1799, he was out riding a horse in the rain and ate dinner in his wet clothes. And on the 14th, he practiced in bloodletting and took 2.5 liters of blood. Yet, after the best treatment in the world for one of the most important people in the world, he died that day. From something that would get you a trip to the doctors, killed you no matter what your status in the past. Number 2, milk sickness. Thousands of people died every year from cows who were eating snake root. So many people, in fact, that there would be around a $20,000 reward to find out what caused it. No one knew until a shiny Native American woman explained that it was a snake root, though she wasn't given the reward money, and one of the people she told was credited for the finding. But she definitely saved a lot of people. Death by milk sounds terrible. And number 1, starting in the 1800s in the UK, if you didn't die from the who knows whats, or didn't die immediately upon being born, you'd most likely die from bronchitis. It only killed 448 people last year. Its death rate then is good luck, rest in peace, and today, the death rate is 0.1. Breathing in smoke is the biggest cause of bronchitis. And at a time when the world looked like this, breathing was really the leading cause of death. Top 3 rare photos from history. Number 3, during a little spoken about mass genocide that had started and lasted for over a year. It happened so quick, and there were so many dead, the original rough estimate was around tens of thousands to 500,000 deaths. But now that figure stands as 500,000 being the low, to upwards of 3 million people killed. And they were killed for being Communist Party members, in preparation of the new order of political conservatives. This picture was taken moments before the mass execution and dismemberment. Number 2, the oldest existing photo of a Native American, depicting a man known as Chief Keokuk, most likely being the first because of his well-known cooperation with the colonizers at the time. Despite signing over land multiple times to keep the white settlers from killing his people, he and the Sauk tribe were forcibly moved time and time again from their land that still continued after his deals. And number 1, Kim Il-sung, grandfather to Kim Jong-un, a North Korean president, noticed a baseball-sized tumor on the back of his neck. When it first manifested, he banned all photographers from taking pictures that included it, and then started taking all of his pictures turning to the left. Once it was too hard to hide, all of his photos were airbrushed before they were released to the public to keep up the facade of perfection he was known so well for. Top 5 fastest moving plants. Number 5, the telegraph plant. And this one is special because it doesn't need physical sensation to make it move, but it can move its leaves fast enough for the naked eye to see. Number 4, the shane plant. And probably the most famous on this list, it uses movement as a defensive mechanism to look like a twig instead of a tasty leaf. Number 3, the squirting cucumber. While the regular cucumber needs help from animals to eat and poop its seeds out, this cucumber just builds up enough until it can't take the pressure anymore, and the juice sacs are emptied in under 2 seconds. It squirts so hard, you'll see its fluid and seeds up to 20 feet away. Just don't get too close, because this squirt juice can actually give you pink eye if it lands in the right place. Number 2, creeping dogwood. It can burst its springy filaments cocked under the petal's leaves in under 0.5 milliseconds. And if you just poke it while it's even close to ready, it'll bust pretty much instantly. And number 1, this guy has a tiny 1-inch pollinator that also takes over a year for one load of pollen to be ready to reproduce, which it does in an impressive 25 microseconds. While it's short and tiny, the females are actually smaller, but luckily their catkins are more erect and actually hairy enough to catch the little guy's pollen shot from up to 10 miles away. The man who was born evil. Born 1891, Carl Panzram grew up on a farm in Minnesota, and as early as 5 years old, felt he was a liar and a thief, but said he started out slow and got meaner and more disturbed as he got older. By the age of 11, he had already been arrested twice, and after stealing a gun in 1903, his parents responded by sending him to a reform school, which only made him worse, as he was beat, tortured, and assaulted by the staff daily, so he burned the place to the ground in 1905. After bouts of robbing people, arsons, home invasions, and unsuccessfully trying to kill a teacher, he enlisted in the military, a season that was short-lived, as he was charged with larceny and imprisoned until 1910. Panzram claimed his time locked up in Leavenworth was the point of no return, and any ounce of goodness he had left him. So after getting out, he assaulted and strangled a man for $1,000, while hiding under the alias Jefferson Davis, one which he muddied by getting arrested twice under it, and changed it again, and then changed it many more times, famously going by these names, arrested under all of them. After helping a fellow inmate escape prison and kill a man, he decided he liked it and wanted more, so he burglarized former President William Taft's house. He stole bonds and jewelry, but also his 1911, and took it for a murder spree. With all the money from that sucker Taft, he bought a yacht where he would lure people on, get them drunk, assault them, kill them, and then throw them overboard. This was a daily occasion, as in a time where the average height of a man was 5'5", and Panzram standing at 6 foot tall with 200 pounds of muscle, he could, and did, overpower and assault any man he set his eyes on, and by his death, committed more than 1,000 acts of forced sodomy that sadly not only included men, but young boys as well. After committing another assault on a fisherman and stealing $20,000 from him, he was reported, and after a few more crimes, found himself back in prison, where some of his alias were found, where he then admitted to much more than they knew of, just that week killing 3 other boys, and he was sentenced to 25 years. His first day back in prison, he claimed, "I'll kill the first man that bothers me," which was a promise he did keep by beating a man in the head with an iron bar to death, which he was then sentenced to death for. The only friend he ever had was a prison guard during his last stay, who supplied him with a pencil and paper, on which he denied repenting for any of his actions and crimes committed. Between then and the age of 5, he killed 21 people, committed over 2,000 crimes under 9 different names, and writing for all the things he's done, he wasn't the least bit sorry. Human rights activists opposed his death penalty, and in response he wrote, "The only thanks your kind will ever get from me for your efforts on my behalf is that I wish you all had one neck, and that I had my hands on it." On September 5th, 1930, Panzram was hanged, and as the officer attempted to put the bag over his head, he spat in the executioner's face. Then when asked for his last words, he stated, "Yes, hurry it up, I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around." Words that would inevitably be his last. Since buried in the Leavenworth Penitentiary Cemetery, under his prison number, where he still lies today.
And then with these 3 boys, especially this boy, Salem, Massachusetts, McMahon boy. He committed sodomy on him. The boy was about 10, 12 years old, and then knocked his brains out with rocks.
Crimes in their faces. Thomas Watson in 1873 was caught stealing a pair of boots and was sentenced to 2 months in prison. And you know what they say, double the crime, double the time. And that's why Robert Charlton was sentenced at age 16 to 4 months in prison for stealing 2 pairs of boots. Something that's petty theft to us now would get you prison time in the 1800s, like Mr. John Bolton, who was convicted of stealing a piece of leather in 1872 and sentenced to 6 months in prison, accompanied by hard labor. And while children did serve severe sentences in adult prisons, the elderly didn't get a pass either, like Elizabeth Smith, who served 11 months and 14 days in prison for stealing 5 covers in 1867. Stealing money was a really big deal, and the theft of money landed you guaranteed prison time, like Herbert Cochran, charged of burglary in Nebraska in 1899. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison and served it at Nebraska State Penitentiary. Seeing by how they had to put him in a headlock just to get his mugshot, it's really no surprise his prison records show he wasn't a cooperative inmate. If you ever go back in time, don't do anything. They'll lock you up. Top 3 statistics you didn't want to know. Number 3. The top 10% of drinkers in the US actually account for 60% of all alcoholic beverages consumed, leaving the 10% of severe alcoholics the ones single-handedly responsible for keeping the industry afloat. And if you're wondering how many drinks these people consume in a week, it's around 74. And 1 drink is 1 can. So each week looks something like this, making the month look something like this, downing nearly 300 cans every 30 days. Number 2. This one's for the Australians, as at least 2 in 3 Australians will be diagnosed with skin cancer before the age of 70. To show how absurd of an amount that is, 2 in 3 people in Australia will develop skin cancer due to UV exposure. And for the US, it's 1 in 3 people, for all types of cancers combined. And the reason for this being they have so many sunny days, averaging 246 a year. To put that into perspective, the city I live in is almost half of that, at 141. And to make it worse, they're located near the Antarctic ozone hole, the ozone layer being the thing that absorbs UV from the sun to keep us safe, and in 2021 has been described as larger than usual. And number 1, 25% of all homeless people in the US suffer from a severe mental illness, including but not limited to things like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and autism. Severe disorders are ones that cause people to interpret reality abnormally. But even something people usually assume isn't a big deal, like bipolar disorder, causes 60% of the people who suffer from it to not be employed, which is on the high end, seeing as 45% of all homeless people suffer from any kind of mental illness. But still, there probably is some overlap, with a quarter of homeless people that are currently employed and working 50 hours a week. Living on the streets with a disorder gives you a high chance of ending up in a hospital. In the average sick leave days from work being 2.5 days a year in the US, job loss is nearly inevitable. Born sick, $13,000 hospital bill, lose your job, become homeless. It's a dark spiraling tunnel some people are doomed to slide down with no way of clawing their way back up. States of facts. Number 3. Presidents can only serve 2 terms in office. So all these presidents that either didn't lose their second term election or didn't die in office during their second term share the top spot for the most days in office. Except you're a gullible fool living in the country you know no history of. After Herbert Hoover sent us into the greatest depression of all time, it took Franklin D. Roosevelt 4 terms to successfully pull us out of it. But after those 4 terms, the Republican-led Congress thought it wouldn't be fair to let someone keep winning, and it was changed. So he'll probably always hold that record. Number 2, we're actually living through what will be considered the most deadly disaster in US history, previously being the AIDS epidemic that killed 700,000 people in 40 years. In less than 2 years, COVID has already killed more Americans than that. And with the most total cases, the most new cases, the most total deaths, and still the most active cases, it probably won't stop anytime soon and could end up holding the top spot for deadliest US disaster until the end of time. And number 1, Hollywood has been making movies for over 100 years, as America's notorious blockbuster movies started when the first movie in Hollywood was shot in 1910, titled In Old California, and it was actually lost for 94 years before a copy was found in 2004. 3 things that don't sound right, but are actually correct. Number 3, modern Christianity is actually a polytheistic religion. Since monotheism is a worship of only one deity while denying all others, that's not really what's going on. It's similar to something like Hinduism, a religion people usually wouldn't hesitate to call polytheistic, but the very nature of Christianity's polytheism is in the religion's name. As Christianity is only 2,000 years old, so by following Christ, God, and not to mention the Holy Spirit, it becomes polytheistic. And saying Christianity is monotheistic would imply that you're denying you would ever worship these two. Just like nearly all religions, there's one God that's more God than all the other gods, and he usually created everything, along with the other deities that are worshipped. It just so happened that the word polytheistic, in the West, now has negative connotations at times. But believe it or not liking a word doesn't simply just change a religion. Number 2, compostable and biodegradable aren't the same things. Things like biodegradable wet wipes are actually just compostable, a process that requires extra chemical help. So whenever you flush them down the toilet, you're adding to your town's fatberg. Fats and oils cover the wipes, leaving them to stick together in the water pipes. Even the ones that claim that they're flushable add to your giant stinky fatberg. And number 1, the devil's lettuce can actually be physically addictive. The good thing is, it's only in chronic users, for people smoking at least every other day for 3 months. Withdrawal symptoms could be loss of appetite, difficulty regulating mood, sleep problems, cravings, physical discomfort, anxiety attacks, and more from your brain's physical dependence from adaptation. It's a side effect on how the brain works, and it being made in a lab or something advertised as natural doesn't really matter when you're introducing chemicals into the brain every day over a long period of time. It without a doubt will change your brain's natural chemical composition, as well as your sensitivity to the substance you're introducing, though like I said, only includes long-term daily lettuce smokers, but to a much further extent, dab takers. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where stopping daily use causes severe nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain, with the weird home cure of being in hot water being the only thing that curbs the symptoms. People with CHS will bathe and shower compulsively, usually for hours at a time and anywhere from 3 to 10 times a day. As you can imagine, hot water curing your violent vomiting episodes and extreme nausea pain, you might stay in the bath for 7 hours a day too. Though the lettuce is definitely still at the top of the safe recreational substance use list, every substance is going to have its side effects. Whether the community likes to admit it or not doesn't really matter. But